Duke Nukem touched down on Nintendo 64 in October 1997, arriving in the shadow of some insanely big hitters on Nintendo's console. The likes of Turok, GoldenEye and Doom 64 were already part of a crowded roster of shooting games that saw the likes of Hexen and Quake 2 touch down before the end of the year. With such high standards around it, Duke Nukem 64 had to be exceptional to get any attention, and sadly it got a somewhat muted response from critics at the time. It's a shame really, because this version of Duke 3D comes packing 30 single player levels, a full multiplayer mode that allows for co-op and deathmatch, and a lot of what made the PC game so special. Duke Nukem 64 aims high and delivers a very fun take on Duke 3D, even if controlling the game is an exercise in frustration at points. But there's a lot to talk about with this version of the game, plenty of changes, tweaks and outright bizarre additions that make Duke Nukem 64 fun to talk about. A small side note, I've captured this footage using Red Nukem as it allows me to explore the levels in an easier way. This is a port of Duke Nukem 64 that runs natively on PCs without any emulation. It fixes the control issues and allows you to scale up the graphics to make it look its best. With all of that out of the way, let's dive into the quirks and oddities of Duke Nukem 64. One of the more fun aspects of Duke Nukem 3D is that the game features mirrors. In Duke 64, however, mirrors are completely absent. It's not just one or two either, all of them have been removed from the game. It's hard to understand why without hearing it from the devs, but I would hazard a guess that it was either deemed too technically costly or simply not worth the effort. Whatever the reason, most of the mirrors in Duke 64 are covered up or smashed. One of the joys of bringing over popular PC games to consoles was letting console players experience what it was like to play that game. Duke Nukem's levels are a key part of that experience, and them not being there would take away from the overall outing. It's interesting then that Eurocom made the decision to not only bring over all the first 3 episodes of Duke Nukem 3D, they expanded and made the levels even bigger, changing them in some huge aspects. Some of the levels only see minor changes, textures and the odd little room adjustments here and there, but then there are levels that get whole new sections. And I'm not just talking about slight additions, I'm talking about additions that basically change the way you experience the level. For example, in Shrapnel City's freeway, there's now a complete multi-level police station that gamers can explore. In Hollywood Holocaust, there's a whole new shop that's been added to level with enemies and items within. In Flood Zone, the yellow key is housed inside an apartment complex. This requires Duke to jump and dive through the flooded buildings. It's crazy how much detail is put into these spaces. And then there's levels like Rapid Transit, which start out the same but then go completely in a different direction, effectively brand new levels. While the bones of this level are still the same, the beat-to-beat gameplay is completely different because of these new sections, including a part where you can jump into a train. Even when exploring simple areas, there are expanded sections that make the world feel so much bigger. Window dressing has been turned all the way up to 11 in this one. It's absolutely insane how much level of detail is thrown into this game. Sure, it's a shame that Nintendo's mandate took out a lot of the adult themes, but when they're replaced so well, it's hard to be truly annoyed. 2 levels which see huge amounts of changes are LA Meltdown's Red Light District and Shrapnel City's Rapid Transit. The former I just discussed earlier, but the latter gets a new name, Gun Crazy, and is completely retrofitted to replace the pawn shop with a gun shop, as well as the entire Gentleman's Club being changed to a Duke Burger, complete with Duke Burger restaurants. But perhaps the craziest attention to detail is the fact that in adding some new locations to flesh out the world, the developers actually link these 2 levels physically. If you use a jetpack and fly to this platform to the right of where you start the level, you'll be able to look into a subway station. It's pretty detailed for a piece of scenery, but you can't access it from here. Many hours later, when you're playing through Rapid Transit, as you make your way to the end of the subway, you'll find yourself stood in that same subway station. Looking through the metal fence, you'll see the street from Gun Crazy, as well as the shops from that level. While this may not feel like much to some people, it's an insane level of attention to detail that does a huge amount of world building, and does something that many first-person shooters simply didn't back then, and don't even do now. It made the world feel cohesive and interconnected. I'm a sucker for this kind of detail, and I just think it's insanely cool that they went to this level of detail. With all the new additions and new spaces, the game had to add in something to entertain the gamer when they went exploring. The original Duke Nukem 3D had a lot of nods and references, and Duke 64 isn't afraid to add in new ones or reuse ones from cut levels. In Death Row, there's now a Hannibal Lecter reference in place of the Doom Guy reference. Across the way from him, there's another movie reference, this time to Kurt Russell's Snake character featured in the Escape from New York movies. In Raw Meat, the karaoke bar is playing host to the Good Old Boys music group. In Lunar Reactor, the Luke Skywalker Easter egg has been replaced by a Yoda Easter egg. The Doom Guy reference has been moved to LA Rumble, where he's now located inside a cell. And in the multiplayer level Franken-Duke, there are multiple references to Frankenstein, including a laboratory and this hand rising out of grave at the front of the level. One big downer for this version of Duke 3D is that when playing through the levels, you'll be met with the sound of gunfire, enemies growling and wailing, but nothing else. There's no background music in this version of the game at all, except in the main menu. It lends a lot of the levels a more depressing feel, and I think it's an incredible shame they didn't make the cut. Speculation online suggests that the developers may not have had enough space on the N64 cartridge to include a full music selection. It was a cost-cutting measure, I suspect. They simply opted not to get a bigger ROM with more storage space, but instead just decided to leave it out. Given how much has been added into these levels, taking out the music is definitely one of the bigger missteps. It should be noted that if you do play on Red Nukem, you can add the music back in through the sound menu. Secret levels are nothing new in first-person shooters, and Duke 3D is definitely a fan of them. In Duke 64 there are secret levels in each of the single-player episodes, nothing too interesting there, but what if I told you there's a secret multiplayer level that most players haven't ever got to experience? In order to access it, you need multiple friends to help complete a switch puzzle in the Shaft multiplayer level. Timing all this right reveals a secret exit panel that when pressed takes you to the Noctis Labyrinthus level, complete with cave systems, a huge pyramid you run around, and even a meteor that if you touch will kill you instantly. The fact that this can't be picked from the main menu means many players probably didn't even know this one existed, making this one of the least experienced levels in any of the Duke Nukem 3D ports. Duke Nukem 3D has a huge roster of weapons for the player to make use of, but not all of them make it to the Duke 64 experience. A lot of the weapons in the game have been reskinned, redesigned, or replaced entirely. The pistol operates the same as it always did, but just looks a bit different. The shotgun now has a secondary fire mode when you use explosive rounds. The Ripper has been replaced by dual SMGs. The RPG is now a grenade launcher, a weapon I'd argue is insanely overpowered in the right hands. The Devastators have been replaced by a rocket launcher, and the freeze ray has been swapped out for a plasma cannon. Whether you prefer this new lineup of weapons or not is subjective, but their addition does give this version of Duke Nukem a very unique flavour. Despite the fourth episode of Duke Nukem 3D not appearing in Duke 64, some of its levels do make the cut in various states. The first is Duke Burger, which can be accessed from the second level and serves as the first episode's secret level. There are quite a few small changes around this one, including the dog kennels being swapped out for a butcher's and a new opening section to tie it closer to the LA Meltdown levels. A few of the enemies have been swapped out, so no more pig cops in tanks. Outside of this though, this level has by and large made the jump. The next level is Area 51. Interestingly, this is accessed through Movie Set, which has a whole new soundstage dedicated to filming a movie about Area 51. Talk about being meta. The start of this level has been shifted slightly, but for the most part, this is the entire level from the Atomic Edition. The final level isn't a full level, but part of a multiplayer map. This is called Piracy, and it's the back part of Babeland. You can't access the earlier part of the level, it's been walled off, but it's pretty cool that some part of this level was repurposed to bring it into Duke 64. A small bonus fact here, the car found at the start of Hollywood Holocaust in Duke 64 is the same car that features in the birth level Pigsty. We know this because it was mentioned by the developers of Duke Nukem 3D on the 20th anniversary commentary track. The sign above the police station in Freeway is also from Pigsty, and the whole section from Death Row, which adds in the prison cells, is also taken from Pigsty. While Pigsty didn't quite make the cut, parts of it were cut off and added to other levels, which I find pretty interesting. In the original Duke Nukem 3D, you'd occasionally bump into these women who were trapped. Unfortunately, you couldn't save them, you could only offer them the sweet release of death when they begged for it. It's one of the few times that Duke Nukem shows genuine remorse and adds some character to his hijinks. Being on a Nintendo console, the idea of shooting helpless women probably didn't go down well. To get around this, those women who could only previously be shot can now be freed. By tapping the use button, the women are teleported to safety. To encourage this, the end of level stats screen even shows how many babes you've saved in the level. I prefer this, and I'm surprised it wasn't part of the original PC game. A curious omission, but one that's interesting when it comes to the end of level stats screen, the game no longer shows you the time it took you to complete the level. Not only this, it doesn't offer up the usual par times for players to play against and try and beat. Given that this was a staple of mid-1990s first-person shooter games, its omission is a curious one. The game also doesn't allow for mid-level saves, following in the footsteps of a lot of N64 games. And that's all I'm going to talk about in this video. There's a lot to cover with Duke Nukem 64, and I've not even begun to scratch the surface of this curious, quirky, and frankly very interesting version of Duke 3D. There's so much that I haven't covered in this video, like the fact that all the Earth-based levels have daytime skies, no matter where you are. Things like the final boss of the game, the Cycloid Emperor, being a huge polygonal mess. The fact that the stadium level has a whole section around it that you can't access because it was originally envisioned as a multiplayer map. If you haven't experienced Duke Nukem 64, I highly recommend it. It's one of the most interesting console ports of any first-person shooter from the 1990s. It had a lot of flaws, but I think it's a version of Duke Nukem 3D that fans should definitely go out of their way to experience.